For your ears only, for the week of 9/11, a date seared into history, I'm David Alpern.
I'm Melissa Axelberth.
There should be nothing controversial about this piece of legislation. Everything in here is the kind of proposal that's been supported by both Democrats and Republicans, including many who sit here tonight. And everything in this bill will be paid for. Everything.
The people of my district and this country expect the fact that we're not going to let those differences get in the way of coming together for common sense solutions that help produce results. And that will be our aim over the next several months.
10 years ago, it was devastation by al-Qaeda skyjacked jetliners that drew Americans and their political leaders together, at least for a time. Last week, it was a devastated U.S. economy, and polls showing growing anger at both parties in Congress and Barack Obama. After a mostly go-along summer, the president took a tougher tone, unveiling his $447 billion jobs package to a joint session of Congress and the viewing public. But he also made a point of picking programs with previous bipartisan support. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, like many Republicans back from meeting with frustrated constituents, was surprisingly open to at least some of the proposals, though few thought even the whole package would do all that much to re-energize demand, production, and employment.
Part of the problem is the way politics have changed in recent years, with money, media, partisan gerrymandering, and ideological passion making compromise and moderation ever more difficult. To consider all that on this 9/11 anniversary, we're joined again by Julian Zelizer, Princeton professor of history and public affairs. His books include Jimmy Carter and the Presidency of George W. Bush, a first historical assessment. Welcome back to our show.
Thanks for having me.
How did you judge Obama's jobs initiative as economic strategy and political tactic after all the abuse he's taken from Democrats for lack of strong leadership?
Well, his political strategy, he wants to show both Democrats and independents he's still fighting, and he wants to put something out there to try to stimulate the economy. Many of the proposals are proposals that Republicans have supported in the past. But politically, you know what's coming. Republicans will accept a little of it and oppose a lot of it.
How do you see response from the previously hostile Republicans like Cantor?
It's moderate. They've said some of the things that he's put on the table, such as some tax deductions they would be willing to accept. They're insisting everything has to be paid for, which adds to the already difficult quandary of reducing the deficit. And there's other parts of it they're going to oppose. My guess is the longer this is out there, the more the heat will intensify, and the Republicans will be more vociferous in attacking key parts of the program.
In the GOP presidential race, you see somewhat the same dynamic, more momentum for extreme candidates who may please primary voters far more than the general election turnout.
Absolutely. I mean, John Huntsman, who's the one candidate other than Mitt Romney who's playing to the center, he's not doing well in the polls. Romney is the one who's trying to balance everything. He's trying to stay to the center while still showing he is a conservative at heart. But Rick Perry is the one who is really capturing the hearts and minds of many in the GOP. And it's those activist primary voters who are defining what the candidates should be saying and what issues they should be addressing.
To what degree does recent vicious weather and natural disaster hold risks for politicians who just dismiss the role of government, and especially its quick emergency relief role?
Well, there is a danger. Often Americans want government, even when they say they don't like it. And during natural emergencies, natural disasters, that's often when people, red and blue, call for the government to help. And you saw some Republicans, like Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, back off some of the extremism of the Republican Party. And you even saw some congressional Republicans backing off of statements by Eric Cantor saying everything has to be paid for, there won't be sufficient relief. And so I do think moments like that give some pause to Republican attacks on government.
Talk about the changes in our election system that shape outcomes long before any votes are cast. It started with reforms to sidestep party bosses and smoke-filled rooms.
During the early 70s, the Democrats changed the system to end the power of the party boss and give power to the primary voter. And then originally the whole idea was to make the process more democratic, to diversify the number of people who choose our candidates. But what we see is the media plays such a big role in deciding who's in and who's out, as do fundraisers, that these decisions are being made earlier and earlier before a primary or caucus even takes place. And so we are almost going back to the old system. There's just new bosses in town.
We know that the donors have ideological goals. Does the media, or is it merely that it focuses on extremes because that's the best way to capture audience?
Yeah, I think there's two different polls. The donors want people who represent certain issues. The media want people who play well and who will capture attention from viewers or from listeners. And so often the people who are most interesting to hear are the ones who are going to get the most attention, even if they're not the most viable national candidates, or even if they're saying things that might not be as reasonable politically. So we're not always getting decision-making based on who would be the best national candidate.
Do the safe seats held by the most conservative members of Congress make it kind of pointless to ask the general electorate to weigh in on an issue like taxes or jobs?
It's an important factor, meaning that most members of Congress are concerned with primary voters. That's all that matters in their districts, and as long as they're good to the members of their party, they're going to win re-election. So a national poll doesn't mean someone to someone from, the 2nd or 3rd district of Arkansas. It's the district that matters. And if those seats are safe, national polls really don't have much of an effect.
Can you connect the rise in ideological passion in any way with the emotions of 9/11, the buttressed faith of survivors back then, the message that we're all targeted and vulnerable?
A little bit. I mean, the passion started earlier. You have talk and evidence of polarization in American politics increasing, dating back to the 1970s. So when 9/11 hits, we're already polarized, and that's how we handle it. Obviously, certain issues about national security are treated with more emotion and passion after 9/11 than before. But even the Tea Party has really been about, the financial bailout, economic policy, deficits, not about 9/11. So on this, weekend where we remember 9/11, I think it's important to remember that we were divided before that came.
Is Obama's best hope now that Republicans will nominate an extreme standard-bearer who will frighten GOP moderates, independents, and disgruntled Democrats into re-electing the president?
That's certainly what the White House is hoping for. I think they sense they are vulnerable. They sense they can seriously be defeated. Many Democrats are not confident a Democrat will be in the White House come 2013. So they're hoping they have another Barry Goldwater moment, meaning the GOP elects someone, nominates someone so far outside the political spectrum that they're doomed to defeat come the November election. But we'll see. Sometimes someone who's a little more extreme can also generate more passion on the campaign trail.
Do you think some Democratic strategists are wondering what they might do to maximize Tea Party power in the primaries to assure an outcome favorable to Obama?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure there's some Democrats hoping that someone like Mitt Romney doesn't win, just because that will give them the campaign they're hoping for, a campaign where they can focus on the Republican rather than on the White House. But we'll see. Mitt Romney, I think, is going to have a very formidable campaign. And frankly, I think Rick Perry, while very conservative, is also a savvy politician who's going to shift to the center when needed.
Julian Zelizer is a Princeton professor of history and public affairs. His current books include Jimmy Carter, a biography, and The Presidency of George W. Bush, a first historical assessment.
Quote from the news, even taking into account the many financial pressures that they face, households seem exceptionally cautious. That was Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke on consumer confidence, reflecting a view of the U.S. economy as worse than it really is. In fact, the Fed's own studies show increased consumer spending in most major markets.
Next, threat assessment 10 years after 9/11. New warnings for your ears only.